Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Want to talk about sex more with your spouse, but you're not really sure where to start or even what kinds of things to talk about? That is what we are covering in today's episode of Charting Toward Intimacy. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway. I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. Joining me today is my amazing semi-regular co-host, Kathleen Chavanis. So, if you've been listening to the podcast anytime in the past year, that I think we've really been hitting it in the past year, is we have talked about sex every day. Like this, that actually bringing up the conversation of sex every day is a phenomenal exercise for you and your spouse to do. And that this can be very good if you are just struggling to have a conversation about sex. If sex is always an argument between you and your husband, if you can implement having a conversation about sex every day, then you can really start to move forward in this conversation. And I'm kind of recapping an episode that we did a year ago before we get into this topic. So the reason why we suggest having a conversation about sex every day is because when it's sort of a standing meeting on the calendar, there is not this worry and concern and need to get everything out in one conversation. Because that's what happens if you're thinking about conversations that you've had over the past year with your husband about sex. And you're literally every single one of them has ended in an argument or somebody frustrated or somebody upset. If that is your experience, one of the contributing factors here, and there's a lot of contributing factors. I'm not saying this is the one thing that's going to save everything. But one of the contributing factors there is that both of you approaching this conversation are trying to get everything out at one time, because it's when else are we going to have this conversation? And so emotions are very high, and you feel like you have to get your point across, and your husband feels like he has to get his point across, and you need to be listening. And, all of this emotion is behind this conversation. Whereas if you're going to have time to talk about sex again tomorrow, you can kind of say your piece, and recognize, okay, you know what, we're going to come back to this tomorrow, and we're going to continue to talk about this, and it's not an end all be all conversation that is happening right at this moment.
I think the other thing is, when you don't talk about it every day, the times that you do talk about it tend to be when there's a problem that needs to be remedied, right? So that makes the conversation start as, hey, can we talk about sex for a second? And then immediately you're put in the defensive, right? Because you're just oh crap, this isn't good, right? This means there's a problem. And you don't look forward to the conversation. It automatically paints it in a negative light. Versus if you are talking about it every day, it's expected and it can turn into positive conversations, right? Versus just hey, this happened and it's sort of an issue, and now we have to talk about it. It just becomes, hey, let's talk about, this aspect of it. And what do you like? What do you not like? And then it just becomes a fun, playful conversation. So it really just turns it from negative to positive when you're doing it every day.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the one other thing to mention on this is we're talking about setting aside 5 minutes of your day every day. We're not saying you need to talk about sex for an hour every single day. That's right. That's a lot. Yeah. Just allowing it to just be something that is regularly a part of your conversation. And I think one more thing I want to say, I just said one more thing and now I'm saying one more.
One more. Bonus.
Is if that feels kind of overwhelming, if you're like, oh my gosh, every single day, maybe start with 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Yeah.
Like just picking a couple days and really just allowing sex to be a regular part of your conversation so that it can be comfortable. It's so uncomfortable to talk about sex. And so if we can get ourselves out of that discomfort and just allow it to be an open and honest area that we talk about, then we're going to be able to make some major strides. So
agreed. Beautiful.
What we're talking about today is, we've been banging this drum for a year now. And I've actually gotten a lot of people kind of reaching out like, okay, but what do we talk about? What kind of topics do we bring up? So Kathleen and I have brainstormed a bunch of questions to offer as conversation starters for this topic.
Yeah. These are great.
So we're just going to...
And literally, though, it could just... I think we'll run through these topics, but I think ultimately it's as simple as anything that has to do with sex and your particular sex life. Like, it can be anything. And we'll give some of the examples that we've come up with, but the list could literally go on forever because it could just be anything that pertains to your sexual experience together.
And some of these questions that we have are bigger questions that would not be answered in a 5-minute conversation. And that is totally okay. Because remember, we're talking about having regular conversation. Like some of these questions could take you a month to like get through the whole thing that you want to talk about.
That's a great point. It doesn't have to be this big overwhelming thing because it doesn't necessarily have to be a new question every day, as Ellen's saying. You could just put a pin in it after 5 minutes and then pick up where you left off on the same question tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's really no rules to this other than the fact that it just has to be focused around your sex life.
Yeah. And regularly occurring.
And every day. That's it. Yeah.
And I think the other thing too, before we run through this list, and we'll have the list down in the show notes. But one more thing before we run through it is some of these questions are very like low level and some of them are harder, deeper questions. And so know your own relationship and know where you are at with conversing about sex. If sex is always an argument, stick to the positive stuff right now. And think about the negative, ask the negative ones once you've gotten into a better rhythm with talking about sex.
Yeah. It's great advice.
Let's just run through it. Okay. First question we have on here. What do you like about the way I initiate? And these questions go either way, right? Like you're asking this question, but then you also will share in this conversation, like your own side. What do you like about the way your husband initiates?
So second would be, would you like me to initiate in a different way? And I think this is really important. Basically, any question you have on here, for the most part, can become 2 questions, right? Because it's like, what do you like? And then what do you dislike, right? Or what do you wish was different? Like, so there are 2 ways to approach and answer all of these questions, which just makes it easier to come up with topics.
Exactly.
So what do you like, or what would you like me to initiate in a different way? What would be more helpful?
What kind of atmosphere do you like for sex? And what we mean by atmosphere is, do you like a dark room? Do you like a light room? Do you like candles? Do you like, this kind of light? Do you like this kind of smell? Do you like this kind of music? And there's like so many things to talk about in atmosphere. So that could be a good one.
Yeah. Yes.
And also like,
agree.
What kinds of things would you like to try for atmosphere? Like Kathleen said, like all of these questions can be broken into like multiple things, right? So there can be a positive and negative to the question. What do you like about this? What do you not like about this? But then also like an exploratory side to the question. What would you like to try in this area? Or what would you like me to try in this area?
Also, I think sort of like hand in hand with atmosphere could also be like personal hygiene requests.
Ooh,
right?
yes.
Like my husband knows that I will not get into it if he has smoked a cigar with his buddies beforehand. Like, doesn't matter how many times you brush your teeth, that's not coming out and I can't take it. So, just what kind of personal hygiene stuff, right? Do you need, obviously, I mean, hopefully you're brushing your teeth. If you're not, actually, if it's the middle of the day, you might not have just brushed your teeth, but that's something that's important for me. Brush teeth, right? Like not sweaty, stinky end of day smell. So if you did sweat a lot that day, maybe take a shower first. Because that I think goes along with smell, right? Like we have to look at all of our senses when we're talking about a sexual experience. Smell is a huge one for me and probably for a lot of you. So along with smell, not just goes like, oh, what scented candle are we lighting, but also how do you smell? Yeah. That's sort of a part of the atmosphere thing. Anyway, go ahead. You take the next one.
What kind of lingerie do you like? I love this conversation. It's fun.
Just browse mentionables together.
Just open
browse
it
together,
Point out the ones you like. This could be like a super fun thing to do. It's just like, hey, like let's look at the menstruals website and like browse through. And the code,
it's
charting
we do it
10
every once in a while.
Gets you 10% off.
Charting 10. Yeah, we'll do it every once in a while. They did just have a new collection drop. So usually when a new collection drops, we go through it together.
Yes.
But another fun thing to do around lingerie is tell your husband, hey, go buy me some things.
Yeah.
Like buy me or go on there and buy me your favorite and just see what shows up. We did that one time and he literally picked the one thing on the site that I was like, ew, that's gross.
It's just so funny. You can learn so
because
much.
It shows our difference in taste. You learn so much, but it also just becomes a fun experiment then. You know what I mean? Okay, well, I was not drawn to that in any way, shape, or form, but you were. So let's just see how it works,
Yes.
Anyway, so lingerie. Next one. Do you like talking during sex? And if so, what kind of talking do you like? Yeah, like sometimes I think we kind of talk about like dirty talk, right? Which doesn't really have to be like dirty. It's not like profane, right? But it's just sort of like you're very aroused and sometimes you are just a little braver with your speech. So do you like that? Do you not like that? If you do like that, like what are some of the things that can be said that really help to turn you on? Or what are some of the things that you enjoy saying to your spouse? Talking those things out, talking about talking can be really beneficial.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then also just expanding on that question, like, is there something you'd like to try with talk during sex? Do you want to try telling a story or do you want to try, maybe if you don't talk at all, do you want to try talking? What kind of things would you like me to say? So again, all of these questions can be just like expanded into further conversations.
Mm-hmm.
What is something that you've always wanted to do? So just, when it comes to sex, what is something, and actually all of these questions that we have in this category, I'm going to run through all of them right now. And then like, what is something about sex that you often think about? So we're kind of just like, we're getting into the daydreams here. What is something that you wish or fantasize about, having sex together? And what we mean by fantasize, we're not talking about like, I don't know, outrageous, impractical or inappropriate like fantasies, right? Like,
right.
Like,
yeah.
That's just daydream. Like all of us daydream about sex. Our brain might like shut it down because we've been like wrapped up in purity culture and we're like, oh my gosh, that's a terrible thing to think about. But like, that's a normal human thing is to like daydream about sex. And so it's a great thing to talk about because maybe if the daydream is a little outrageous and like not possible, or maybe not possible at this time of life, that doesn't mean that there isn't some aspect of it that couldn't be fulfilled.
Right.
And so it's wonderful to like kind of talk about those dreams and fantasies and the things that you'd kind of like to try or do. And then see, okay, what can we make happen with that? Or maybe it's a really simple fantasy. Like I fantasize you after the kids go to bed, putting on lingerie and like coming downstairs and being like, hey, come on upstairs. Right? Like, okay, that's a pretty easy one to accomplish.
Very simple.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. Another question, how often would you like to be having sex? And I think for anyone charting, sometimes going along well with this question is, okay, let's look at how often we actually are having sex.
Yes.
Right? Pull open the charts, look back, say, when are we and how often and how many times a month? Because I can tell you, sometimes it's not as much as you think it is. So good to see how much are we having sex, and then follow it up with, okay, how often do we want to be having sex?
Yeah.
Something that I think a lot of times between men and women who are more spontaneous versus responsive and all of that, this is a point where we are often divided. And I think a conversation over it can really help us to understand the other and to draw more and to pull us out of our comfort zone to try and achieve, or I guess meet halfway, really is what I want to say, right? To try and kind of come together over this question.
Absolutely. This is also a conversation. Just recognize where you're at in your relationship. If this is going to be a touchy subject, save it for later. Save it for when you're more comfortable. Next question. What is your favorite position? What is a position you would like to try? Little shout out for the Catholic positions guide that I created. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. If you're looking for like a safe place to look for new positions, it's got 50 positions in it, tips and tricks and troubleshooting. And also there's a whole foreplay guide on there. It's a fantastic resource. So check that out. But yeah, checking out positions.
Positions are good. Also, what are your favorite things that I do during sex? What are things you dislike that I do during sex? And then also, what was your favorite sexual encounter we ever had, right? So things I do that you like, things I do that you dislike. And overall, what's your favorite sexual encounter? Because you can get a lot of that information just by discussing that encounter.
Yeah. And be careful with this one. Like, what is your favorite sexual encounter that we have had?
Yes.
If either you or your spouse has had a history of sexual encounters outside of your relationship, there's really no reason to talk about those of like, oh, this is something I did with somebody else. Like it's not necessary.
That discussion will almost certainly end in an argument.
Yeah. What are things that you like to do during foreplay? Is there something you would like to try during foreplay? Yeah, talking about foreplay. That is a huge topic in there.
Huge one. Yeah. And kind of going along with it, what helps you relax before sex, right? That is all a part of foreplay. The candle lighting, the massage, whatever it is, that's not directly sexual. It could happen outside of a sexual act, but that helps you to relax. That is all a huge part of foreplay. And also foreplay. What would you like to have done around the house before sex? For women, our brains are our primary sex organ, right? So if we know that downstairs is a total disaster, it might be hard to relax upstairs in your bedroom and get into it. What would you like done around the house before sex? Huge, huge thing to talk about just for our own mental safety.
Absolutely. And is there something that embarrasses you about sex? This is something that save this question for once you guys have gotten really comfortable talking to each other about sex. But this is an awesome question to have a great conversation about.
Yeah.
And then in a very similar lane here is there anything you would like to have in place before being comfortable to have sex? Because I think there can be some embarrassment around the needs that we have and being comfortable and safe having sex. Kind of thing.
Absolutely. This is another deep one that maybe you don't want to start off with, but after you've gotten used to talking about it more, you can kind of go here. What are your past experiences of sex? And how do your past experiences affect our sex life and affect how you view sex? Those are really deep things that you may not have even really thought about. So again, time this one well when you maybe have more than 5 minutes.
Don't start with this one.
Definitely don't start with this one. Time it well. You want to, this could be a long conversation. And I think you need to be in a good emotional spot to have this conversation. And you need to be in the routine of talking about sex for a little bit, I think, before you bring this one up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one, and again, these are all just like ideas that we brainstormed, like talk about anything, but we're just going to end on a silly one to just remind you that these do not have to be big, huge topics. Do you like wearing socks during sex? Might be a good one to start with. Just start with that one.
That is so interesting. I don't know that I've ever worn socks during sex.
There's like if you're trying to get pregnant, there's something about wearing socks because it keeps the woman's body warmer, and but I don't know. There's something about socks, but
that is so interesting.
I think it's
a
solid and fairly safe conversation to have, especially if like talking about sex is kind of contentious. Like, let's talk about socks.
Yeah.
So there you go. There are some topics to jump into to start having regular conversations about sex with your spouse.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.